To a muddy farm track. Well, it's not a farm track, it's a woodland track. Welcome to Sawtry, part one. There's going to be two parts to this one because it's quite a daunting and quite detailed, I suppose, video, and I can't cram it all into one, so it's going to be a two-part box set or something. This first one I've called Origins because I'm trying to sort of dig deep down to where the hell does Sawtry come from, and that's kind of what this part one is all about. Where does the name come from? First of all, Sawtry comes from, I think it was pronounced Saltry. It was spelled Saltry. I mean, I'm pronouncing it Saltry because it suits me to do that. I can't see how else it would have been pronounced. That's what it was called in the Domesday Book. And yeah, it was a place where salt traders were. They either did their business here, or I think more likely they just travelled through here. The salt came from the fens. Sawtry was very close to, I mean, some say very close to the coast, but I mean, it was marshland, fenland, but it was salt marsh. So with the sea levels dropping and the sort of marshes drying out and evaporation and seawater turning to salt, you can all work that one out for yourselves, but they used to carry the salt, dig it up and bring it back through Sawtry, and so it was given the name Saltry. I did read somewhere from a couple of historians, proper historians, that the word Saltry is actually Anglo-Saxon and dates to about the 900s, so I think you could probably say that's where Sawtry originates from, the 10th century. The 900s, but it's called Sawtry. We will refer to it as Sawtry throughout. It didn't actually get called Sawtry or anything sounding like Sawtry. I think it's Sawtree, Sawtry, in the 1600s. Prior to that, it probably would have been pronounced differently, but we will call it Sawtry, otherwise it gets very confusing. So that's where the name came from. It's turning into a swamp down here. Now, having said there was a Sawtry in the Domesday Book, there's actually three. There's a Sawtry All Saints, St Andrews, and a Sawtry Judith. Three different parishes, each with a church, and they stayed separate for quite a few hundred years. So that's complication number one. Now we're starting very much on this video with Sawtry Judith. You'll see the reasons why as we progress, but Sawtry Judith was named after Countess Judith of Lons in France, and she was, let me get this right, William the Conqueror's sister's daughter, so William the Conqueror's niece. And if you were, and she was a popular niece by all accounts, so you know, if you're a niece of the King of England, you're going to get rewarded and you're going to get land, and she got a lot of land, not just here but all over these parts. But this is the parcel of land that she liked most, because she set up here in her manor house, and she lived here for most of her life. She was very, very popular with the locals here. She was very generous, charitable, and they often refer to her as Saint Judith, and you'll still see references to Saint Judith in modern day Sawtry, but she wasn't a saint, not officially anyway. But she was very popular around these parts, and yeah, as I say, Sawtry Judith is of probably the greatest significance when it comes to the origins of Sawtry, which is why I'm starting here in Archer's Wood. Why are we in Archer's Wood? Because this is where her manor house was. So we will have a quick casting of the camera across the field shortly. I warn you now, there's nothing there to see. It's all under the ground now, but it seemed wrong to do a sort of origins of Sawtry without starting right here. Okay, well, I mean, yeah, that's as exciting as it gets, I'm afraid. That is the field within which the manor house sat. It's referred to on maps as a manorial site. It's been archaeologically dug to prove that the manor house was here, and a few other buildings, probably farmstead buildings. Some refer to it as being Sawtry Judith village. I think that's a bit of an exaggeration. Sawtry Judith actually had quite a big acreage in terms of land, but There was never a lot of people living here. I think you're talking in terms of under 30 at the time of the Domesday Book. So I think calling it a village is probably a bit much, but you can choose whichever name you wish. But that is where it was, across these fields. Now, why is it no longer here? Well, you can blame Judith's grandson for that, Simon de Senlis, who was, I assume he held the manor here. He certainly was the Earl of Northampton and Huntingdon, so he was an important guy. And as I said in videos before, they were very God-fearing times compared with today. Back then, average lifespans were a lot shorter than they are today. People didn't live as long. I guess that made them a little bit more God-fearing than we are today. And people were always looking for good deeds to be done, to put them in the good books of the Almighty, as it were. And Simon's cunning plan was to give up one of his fields to some local monks. Say local, they were from the old Warden Abbey down in Bedfordshire, and they were looking to set up another abbey as they were pretty much full down there, and that was their job, to spread the word, find another abbey, get it set up. And yeah, Simon said, well, hey, I've got a field, you can use that. So these Cistercian monks set about building their abbey, which we'll be talking about in greater detail later on in this video. But I guess the bit that Simon didn't bank on was Cistercian monks don't really like being anywhere near anybody. They like to be secluded, they like to be on their own, they certainly don't want to be a part of any village. So it's pretty widely accepted that when the abbey was built, the village vanished, and that's pretty much, I'm sure, because the Cistercian monks said, you can't stop there if we're going to have an abbey just down the road from you. So basically St Judith, or Sawtry Judith, give it its right name, kind of migrated up to the sort of southern part of where Sawtry is today, where you'll still see the name Judith in street names, as we'll see in the second of the videos. So yeah, they basically disappeared from these parts. So this was once the sort of hub of Sawtry Judith, and very much in terms of buildings, to me, the origin of Sawtry. It's now all migrated further north because of the abbey. Right, we're heading out of the muddy footings of Archer's Wood, and we're going to go trekking across even more muddy fields, no doubt, to try and find the site of Saltry Abbey. Tell you what, apart from being windswept, this place is very, very isolated, most definitely isolated, and it's a long trek from Archer's Wood, but we are coming up pretty soon to the site of where Saltry Abbey was based and sited. Before we get there, let me put up a couple of pictures that will help. The first is an illustration of what the abbey probably looked like. Now, I mean, it was never considered to be the biggest of abbeys, but as you can see, it had some stature to it. This second diagram is a sort of archaeological assessment based on digs that they've made of what is under the ground. The bit I've circled is where the actual abbey itself was, because there was a lot of other buildings there. It wasn't just an abbey. The Cistercians were very self-sufficient. They had their own sort of, they grew their own food, grew their own crops. They had like mills and bakehouses, and they looked after themselves. They didn't pop out and go down to the local Tesco. You know, they had everything they needed on site, basically. The Cistercians were particularly good at creating waterways where they needed waterways. This one pretty much runs around most of the site. No doubt was built to give them added protection from the outsiders, really, and to isolate themselves still further. Just hoping we can cross it somewhere. As you can see, there's bumps and lumps and passageways, trackways, all sorts. The abbey, the main abbey building, would be on the horizon in front of us. Being a sort of self-sufficient, self-sustaining site, the abbey had numerous fish ponds. Eels, carp, tench, bream, pike. Fish were very popular back then, and on the days they couldn't eat meat, which was a lot of days, their fasting days, they were allowed to eat fish. So they had fish ponds to look after stocks to take to the table, and this would definitely be one of them. You have to use your imagination a wee bit here, but we'd just be walking pretty much up to the main abbey building just up ahead, just behind this water. Why is there no abbey here today, or any remnants of the abbey today, apart from bumps and lumps in the ground? Well, blame Henry VIII, I suppose, and his pal Thomas Cromwell, dissolution of the monasteries in the 1500s and all that. You know, without going into all the details of the dissolution of the monasteries, basically Henry VIII wanted money. He figured there was too much money going into these sort of places, so he wanted to knock them down and take their earnings off them. And I think the very first phase of the dissolution of monasteries was to send Thomas and his cronies out to find out which of the abbeys was not making a lot of money. I think it was something like £200 a year was his limit. Anything less than that, it's going. And he reported Sawtry Abbey as very poor and not making £200 a year, which on the face of it's a load of baloney, really. I mean, they were a very charitable abbey, more so than most other abbeys. There were poems written about them. I won't attempt to recite them, but yeah, they were very charitable. They gave a lot to local villagers. They provided hospitality for people passing on the Great North Road, which is nearby. So maybe they didn't make a lot of money, I don't know, but it's hard to believe they didn't make £200 a year. But it was an excuse. It was an excuse to say, you guys get out of here, and they knocked the place down. I guess they probably took what was valuable and just left it in ruins. The reason the ruins aren't here is because people basically robbed the stone. It was just sitting here, and the stone was taken away to be used wherever. There's a couple of places in Sawtry where we know the stone, or some of the stone, still exists. We'll see at least one of those, if not two of those, in this or the next video. But basically over a period of time, it was going on into the mid-1800s, there was still stone here, but it all disappeared soon after that, and so there's absolutely nothing left. But it's underground. They've done archaeological digs, the foundations are still down there, but the stone on the top has all vanished. Possibly another fish pond, I'm not 100% certain. It could just be some sort of enclosure that's just flooded. It doesn't really have the shape I would expect. It could be a fish pond, but we are coming up to the area marked on the maps as being very distinctive fish ponds. I think there's 3 of them side by side, as you can see on the map, and they're behind this barbed wire, so I won't be clambering in, but you should be able to see them. I think they were stew ponds. As I understand it, they would move fish from the main pond into what they called stew ponds, which is what these were. I mean, they don't look anything like now what they used to look like, obviously, in medieval times, but they've moved into the stew ponds to clean them up. So I don't know how that works. It's almost as though the water is cleaner, but they moved them in here to get some of the mud and grime off from the main pond, and it'd be from these ponds that they would be taken into the, in this case, into the abbey, to the table, as it were. I mean, they may have put different species in different pools. I have no idea how it worked. This would have been the middle of those 3 ponds, and there'll be another one behind that bush. I could just see it glimmering. So those are your 3 ponds, and the main pond was at the back somewhere. I'm not sure we'll see that one. If it's still here, the main pond should be somewhere down here. Yeah. Obviously all overgrown. But you are talking, what, 800, 900 years ago when that was a fish pond. That's the big one. As I say, the fish would be moved from here into those stew ponds on their way to the table, basically, and in preparation for eating. That's good to see it's still here. Looking back up to the site of the abbey now, just over the top, right on the horizon really. We've just dropped down into this field just to see this. Quite a substantial, probably been widened a wee bit over the years, but that drain was actually built by the Cistercian monks. If I climb the bank, you can see it disappearing in the distance. I think from this point eastwards, it is known as the Monks' Lode. It travels down to that bridge in the distance, if you can see it. And it travels in a pretty much straight line across to what used to be Whittlesea Mere, which was a huge sort of inland sea. It was kind of, well, you can read up on Whittlesea Mere, but it was the biggest inland lake, as it were, in lowland Britain. And they built this dike pretty early on after arriving, before the abbey had even been finished. And they did so they could bring materials in to build the abbey, because a lot of the materials, if not all of it, came from the quarry at Barnock, the Barnock Hills and Holes as we might know it today. And they had to bring it. It's an amazing thought, is to bring that stone via waterways through Whittlesea Mere and up here. Incredible. I mean, on what, I don't know. What did the boats look like with lumps of stone on it? It's just it's beyond my imagination, but that's what they did. They were shrewd individuals. They had an isolated site, but they needed to get materials here, and that's what they did. It didn't actually go down that well with some of the other abbeys. I think Thorney Abbey wasn't too chuffed with the Saltry monks building this channel down to Whittlesea Mere, because it cut across their territories and their lands, but I think they all struck deals so that the monks from Sawtry didn't sort of pillage stuff from the lands of the other abbeys. They just wanted the waterway access. The monk's Lode. One of the mysteries when doing my research on this one that I couldn't resolve really was all to do with the church, the parish church of Sawtry Judith. I mean, there was one, it's mentioned in the Domesday Book, but I was trying to work out where was it, and I couldn't find out. I couldn't see any clues, couldn't find any clues, but then I started seeing old references that said it was actually right next to the abbey. In fact, some of them said it was actually next to the gatehouse of the abbey, and some even said that it formed part of the gateway of the abbey. Is that true? I mean, it's a long way away from what I knew as, from looking at maps, where the village or villages or farmsteads of Sawtry Judith were. I can't imagine people traipsing like I've just done across fields for a very long distance. Well, it felt like a long distance. It just seems a bit hard to believe their parish church would be this far away from the manor house and everything else, but that seems to be the only references we've got, that it was actually in front of the gateway to the abbey. It was run by the abbeys. It was dedicated to St Mary when they finished the abbeys. That would have been 1238. Which begs another question, which is, what was the church called before it was dedicated to St Mary in 1238? So for a couple of hundred years nearly, it must have had another name, and I don't know what that is. So I can't answer those, and it always bugs me when I can't work things out. But if it was in the gateway or at the gateway of the abbey, then I think we'd be looking at it now somewhere in front of us. I think the gateway was down here. Lots of trackways. I know they're flooded and they look like lakes, but they're not. They're trackways of some sort, or were trackways, going off in all directions. Including that one. Looks like a waterway, I'm pretty sure. That's a flooded trackway. Might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it is. There's grass underneath it. Right, we're departing the site of the abbey now. I do apologise, there's nothing more spectacular to see, but you can't really cover the origins of Sawtry without covering the manor house and site of Sawtry Judith at the very beginnings, and you certainly can't cover the history of Sawtry without visiting and looking at what's left of the abbey, which is bumps and lumps really. But it's a scheduled monument under the ground. There's a lot of good stuff there. It'd be nice one day if that could be uncovered really for people to see and make more sense of it, but there you go. So now a long trek back, because it's a kind of further trek along the ecclesiastical journey of Sawtry. We're leaving the abbey now. It's been demolished. The sort of ecclesiastical centres now with the churches of St Andrew and All Saints. I did mention St Mary's, the sort of Sawtry Judith church, which would have been behind us somewhere now. That was demolished at the same time as the dissolution of the monasteries, destruction of the abbey. They all went together. I think the church survived for a short time afterwards, but nobody wanted it. Having moved all the residents of Sawtry Judith further north towards what we know today as Sawtry, they went to All Saints Church. They weren't bothered with coming back to go to the church here. So after a short period of time in the sort of 1540s, was it? 50s? Something like that, I don't know. Mid 1500s, the church was levelled along with the abbey. St Andrew's Church. What can I tell you about St Andrew's Church? Apart from it's not here. There's a theme running through this video, I think. The parishes of St Andrew and All Saints merged together in the 1860s, I think it was. And the first thing they did really was say, look, we don't need two churches. And both of them were pretty run down, so they demolished them. They levelled them both and they built a new one, which was where today's All Saints Church is. St Andrews was just used, or the stone in St Andrews and the original All Saints was put together to create the new church, which we will see after this one at All Saints. So St Andrews vanished, but the graveyard didn't. So you had, I suppose you'd call it an orphaned graveyard, which used to be very overgrown, but it's now been tidied up, I'm told, so it'd be worth seeing. But the church is gone, just the graveyard that's left. However, as you've seen from the sparkly new gates, the All Saints Church graveyard is now full, and they have in effect bought a plot or made a plot next to the old St Andrews graveyard. So we've now got the old St Andrews and the new All Saints graveyard side by side, but my interest is in the old St Andrews one, so that's what I'm going to go and try and find. This is the very pristine and very recent All Saints graveyard expansion. Always a lot of character in orphan graveyards, I always think. I've seen one or two around the country before. They do tend to get overgrown, but it kind of, I don't know, there's just a vibe about it, an atmosphere, call it what you will. Seeing the stones in amongst sort of longer grass rather than mowed grass. It's kind of how it should be. I'm going to put up this wonderful old photograph. We're lucky to have a photograph of the St Andrews Church, because photography was only relatively new at the time that the church was demolished at the end of the 1870s. But yeah, it's wonderful photograph. I think we're looking at the right direction, because the graveyard would have been on the south, which is where we are, with the church behind it. Very unusual looking church, with like dormer windows in it, which I can't say I've ever seen before on a church. And you can see it's a little bit the worse for wear. Great character, but it does look a little bit the worse for wear. I read up somewhere that most of the gravestones are made out of sandstone, excuse me, and as such they're going to wear away, or at least the inscriptions are going to wear away and make them very difficult to read. So whether we'll find anything that we can take away, I don't know. Yeah, I'm going to struggle to read any of them, I think. What about this one? Yeah, I can't read that, unfortunately. Some very big tombstones over here. George F. Newton, who died January the 7th, 1863, aged... I can't read that. 35, 55. Members of the Newton family all along here, all four of them. Anne Maria Newton, Harriet Newton, Elizabeth Newton. That is a mighty slab of stone. Newton family. Ralph Newton, who died December the 12th, 1851, aged 71 years. Tremendous stone. And that's his wife, Sarah, died 1867, aged 80. Some wonderfully carved stones. That's a very old stone. I know a little bit about this one because I've seen pictures of it. I'll add what I can at the bottom of the screen. I think this is a guy who died in a duel just across the other side of the Great North Road at Torts Hill. 1756. There you go, there's St Andrew's graveyard for you, or orphaned graveyard, and it's a bit overgrown, but I kind of feel like that's probably how it should be. So it's quite atmospheric and full of character still, even if there's no church still going. I did touch on earlier the fact that All Saints and St Andrew's merged in the 1870s. What about Sawtry Judith? Well, that stayed independent, as it were, until I think it was 1930s, just before the Second World War, and then they joined in, and the three of them merged, as it were, to what is today's Sawtry. That was the end of the three parishes. All Saints Church, as it is today. There are meant to be some stones from Saltry Abbey that were left outside of this church and are still here, although I can't find them at the moment. It must be these on the end here. Yeah. I'm going to assume it's these. Barnack stone, presumably. So what, 900 years old? This is a photograph of the old All Saints Church before it was demolished in the 1870s in readiness for the current day church. You can see it's not a whole lot different to now, but it is different. And this one before you, today's church, it's the best of All Saints Church as was, and St Andrew's Church as was. Let's see if we can find something out about this one as I can read it. Mary Ann England, who died September the 24th, 1902, aged 77. Also of James England, the husband of the above, who died March the 8th, 1905, in his 81st year. His end was peace. Gravestone made by Stevens of Peterborough. I believe that was the stonemason down Eastfield Road, if I remember rightly. church was built by a chap called Arthur Blomfield. I'll put a picture up. It was a sort of Gothic style that he specialised in. Having said that, a lot of the windows have come from the older churches, so predate his style, and probably go back 1200s, 1300s. I wish I could tell you which ones are which. And the bell at the top, I believe, I read somewhere came from Sawtry Abbey, which would be great if that is true. No reason to doubt it. The original All Saints Church here had two bells. One of the bells, when it was demolished, went to Albert Place School, which some of you might be familiar with, in Peterborough. Lots of random pieces on the church, which I guess you would expect if it's made up of the best of other churches, just randomly placed in the wall. Interesting. I mean, that looks like, well, it looks quite old. I wouldn't say, well, it must be medieval surely, but it's upside down. It's upside down. That must have come from one of the other churches. Why it made more sense that way around, I don't know. That definitely looks like medieval graffiti of some sort, and that is also upside down. It's a theme here. Yeah, that's upside down. That must have come from the old church, or one of the two old churches. It's amazing when you get to the end of a 3.5 hour video that the skies break open and the sun starts to come out. Somebody's got a sense of humour, I think. Anyway, heading down to an area of land known as Torts Hill, and this is a land of mystery, history, legend, and probably a bit of myth too. So you'll have to make your own minds up about some of this, but can't really cover medieval history of Sawtry without covering Torts Hill. Just noticed there's a field full of horses, but they're going to have to put up with me. That is a moat, marked on maps going back hundreds of years, so it is most definitely a moat. It's not just a flooded field, and there's plenty of flooded fields at the moment with the rain that we've had, but this is a moat. It's a medieval moat. The water used to go all the way around. In fact, it probably nearly does again. When I was told when they built the A1, which is just behind the fence to our left, it caused the moat to drain. I suppose they probably messed with water tables, and the result was all the water vanished, but it's all come back now, certainly with the help of the rain we've had of late. But the raised ground is in the centre there, and the moat wraps around it. Well, there's the platform right in the centre of the moat straight in front of us. Now, the big question is, what was it a moat around, or what was on that platform? And that's where the sort of legend and the myth and whatever comes into it. The only facts that I can really pick up on from reading reports is that there have been archaeological digs here, and they date it to being no older than 1200s, 13th century. So it's not older than that, which doesn't really narrow it down a whole lot. I mean, it could be, as some have suggested, a fortified manor house. So you would have had some, primarily I would guess, wooden buildings on there, including a manor house for whoever held the manor at the time that it was built. But as to who that was, when that was, it's impossible to tell. So it could be as mundane as a farmhouse. This could have been a farmstead, could have been a farmhouse on there. The fact there's a moat round it doesn't necessarily mean that it was some sort of fortification, because certainly in late medieval years, moats were as much as anything ornamental. So we don't know what it is, but it's medieval, some stage in the medieval era, and it is most definitely a moat. As you can probably see, now the sun's come out, it shows it up a little bit better. You've got bumps and lumps all over this field. There were buildings here, there were trackways here, there's something lurking in this field under the ground by way of foundations. Some say it's a kind of lost village in inverted commas. Others say no, it was just a farmstead with farm buildings and whatever. Again, we don't know what it was. If the dating of the moat is anything to go by, it's sort of 1200s, 1300s, around that sort of time. And it could have been an extension of what was the village at that time, but it could just be a farmstead. We've moved into the second of the fields at Torts Hill. As you can see, plenty of bumps and lumps and probable trackways, but apart from the moat, the other sort of principal feature of Torts Hill from a historical perspective is what we're heading to, which is basically a hill, and we're moving up that hill now to the summit, which is most definitely full of myths and legends. The myths and the legends, as it were, relating to this high ground, which has water in it at the moment, but don't be put off by that. That's simply because we've had a lot of rain. That would normally just be a depression in the ground. So you've got sort of a high ridge running around it. This hill, if you like, this hollowed out hill, has been labelled as both a Roman lookout point and as a Cromwellian gun emplacement. Now I'll do the Roman one first. Just behind that fence in the background is the A1, or the A1M. I think it's slightly down the field there and over the fence. On the southbound carriageway, we know there was a Roman settlement. So this only bit of high ground around here being used as some sort of lookout for the Romans looking out across Ermine Street is quite feasible. I don't suppose for 1 second they built it. It was just here and they used it as a lookout point. So I'm not going to argue with that one. There's no proof one way or the other. The Cromwellian thing, well, we're talking 1600s here. Oliver Cromwell was born just down the A1, I believe, in Huntingdon. And the theory is that he used this as a place where he could be up high above the Great North Road, could see what was coming from north and south, and he had a couple of mighty cannons, one here on the left and one over there on the other side on the right. So one was pointing north, one was pointing south. Again, I don't think there's any proof. I'm sure there isn't any proof that says this is definitely a Cromwellian cannon emplacement, but that is the historical theory, myth, legend, whatever. Make of it what you will. But this and the moat are really the two principal historical high points, if you like, of Torts Hill. I suppose we'll ever know the full story of Torts Hill. Right, that's it. The bumps and lumps of Torts Hill brings this one to a close. I hope you got something out of that. It's quite hard going, some of it, but I can't really just do the history of Sawtry by starting with old schools and pubs and whatever. They will be in the second video, but I had to do the background. I had to put some context on it. I had to talk about the parishes. Couldn't not mention the Abbey. and I need you to cover the churches as well, or what were the churches. So I hope you found something of interest out there, and as always, thanks for keeping me company on this muddy, cool, extremely windy day. I hope the wind didn't spoil the sound too much. I tried my hardest to keep the microphone protected, but it was a tough day. Any comments underneath the video on YouTube or Peterborough Images, always appreciated. So anything you've got to offer, good, bad or indifferent, please shout. And subscribe, the little red button in the corner if you haven't clicked on it already. Just click on it. It's harmless, it just helps me a lot. I could do a lot more if I can get up to 1,000 subscribers, and I'm at about 950 now, so you could make the difference if you haven't already subscribed, so please do. And that's it. I will see you in the second video, which will be schools, pubs and more, whenever I can get out again. So I'll see you then. Thank you.